All right, good evening. Welcome to the Newmarket Planning Board meeting. If you could please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. Before we start, Peter Nelson sent an email to me today. He's not going to make it. So, Mikhail, you'll be on board, front row tonight. Next on the agenda is public comments. Any public comments? Hearing none, I will close the public comment session at 7:01. Next is review and approval of the September 12th minutes. Is there a motion?
Okay. Motion to approve the September 12th, 2017 minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion, comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
I'm just abstaining.
Janice is abstaining for the record.
Reason being I wasn't here, in case you need a reason.
What's today's date? The 10th, right?
Quiet.
Next on is regular business. Kyle Pimental from Stratford Regional Planning update regarding the setting sail grant regarding the Coastal Risk and Hazard Commission's final report. Good evening, Kyle.
Good evening. There's a couple of new faces, so let me introduce myself. I'm Kyle Pimental. I'm this Principal Regional Planner at Stratford Regional Planning Commission. So I'm basically going to go over just a brief presentation about the Coastal Risk and Hazards Commission report that was published November of last year. I gave Roseanne 3 copies of the report. It's also online. I think that the town has at least 1 or 2 copies that were dropped off. There's one at the library as well. There's one here at the town hall.
There's one at the town clerk's office.
Yeah, okay. And it's also online if you want to download it. To keep this as informal as possible, if you have any questions as I'm going through this, feel free to just sort of put your hand up and we can do that. So to give a sort of a brief overview of how the commission started, back in 2013, 3 Seacoast state senators came together and they put forth some legislation to establish this commission. So it was David Waters, Nancy Stiles, and Martha Fuller Clark came together, and basically the thought was they wanted to gain a better understanding about how New Hampshire would be potentially impacted by certain types of coastal flooding risks. So there were 3 pieces to this commission. The first is a clear and focused mission statement, and what that said was basically what the mission for the commission was to come up with legislative actions to address coastal hazards for municipalities and state assets. The other piece to the mission statement is that any sort of action that was going to be put forth in this report needed to be based on science and the best available climate science that was available, specifically utilizing agencies like NOAA. So that was the big piece in terms of the focused mission. We weren't tasked with looking at drought or extreme heat or anything like that. This was strictly looking at coastal hazards and coastal flooding. The second piece is it was a broad-based membership. There were 17 coastal communities that were represented. For Newmarket, Bill Cherry was your representative that attended all of the commission meetings. That also included key state agencies like DOT and the Department of Historical and Cultural Resources, and other outside stakeholders, including real estate and the insurance sector. So it was a pretty broad group. There was about 37 people that attended as part of this commission. And the last piece is that we started in holding meetings in 2013, 2014, and we were sunset in December 2016. If you'd like to know more information, you can look at the RSA that was established, 483E, or look at Senate Bill 163 if you want more information about the commission itself. So I'll go over this briefly. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this information before. But the first thing that the commission wanted to do was come up with the science that was going to be our baseline for what all the recommendations were going to be grounded upon. So in 2014, the Science and Technical Advisory Panel was established, and that was a number of different local climate scientists, folks from UNH. We also had a climate skeptic on that committee in order to sort of balance things out a little bit and to ask certain questions and sort of push the scientists a little bit further. They looked at 3 different pieces of data. They looked at sea level rise, they looked at extreme precipitation, and they looked at storm surge. So I'm going to talk about each one of those separately. So the first one, sea level rise, and again, you've probably seen this chart before, and what they looked and projected out was between 2050 and 2100. A lot of folks, when they see this graph, they see that sort of steady line that goes from 1900, and then at the year 2000, you see this really drastic increase. And that's because before this modeling that they did, they started their baseline at 1992. So from 1992, those curves start to change quite dramatically. So that's why you see those big upticks.
Was there data for starting earlier? You said, what was that, 1900?
Yep.
Is there data for that?
Yeah. So they've got data that goes back this far, but they decided to use 1992 to model the new curves.
Why? Why did they decide to do 2000? Because that bottom blue line started to go up?
So the bottom blue line is if nothing changes. So if you look at 1900 to 2100, taking into consideration that curve, it would stay flat like that. Climate scientists think because of emissions changing more recently and greenhouse gases that curve is going to change dramatically. So they chose 1992 as their baseline, and that curve started to go up a lot faster. So that's why you see those changes. So if you look at the blue line, that's if things had never changed from 1900. No industrial revolution, we're not polluting as much, the population stays relatively same, that line would stay flat, but we know that that's not true. So that's why you see the modeling shows a lot steeper increases.
Okay.
So their projections, the big numbers that they want communities to think about in terms of projects are that 0.6 to 2.0 feet by 2050 and the 1.6 to 6.6 by 2100. Those are the 2 ranges that this committee came up with. Again, this science is going to be looked at about every 5 years. These numbers might change, but this is what the report is based on, are those numbers. And those are the numbers that we've been recommending that communities look at in terms of long-term planning infrastructure projects. If there's a bridge or a large piece of another building that's going to last 50 to 75 years, and they're going to be built in a vulnerable area, to use these numbers to think about how it could handle certain sea level rise scenarios.
I'm sorry, just a quick question, maybe just to kind of jump on
Sure.
Rosie just brought up. So I'm just curious, the skeptic, what was his or her perception about starting in 1920?
92.
92, sorry.
So there was pushback. In the end, it was unanimously voted.
Okay.
So the commission, there wasn't anybody that didn't agree upon this in the end. Getting to this point, there was some back and forth between the climate scientists and that particular person. I think that his biggest pushback was that, and which is true, those numbers that you see in those curves is all based on modeling.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just take the straight line curve, which is the argument on the other side, you stick with just historic data and stay that trend forward, you would see that blue line. Climate scientists seem to think that those variables have changed, and you can't keep that straight line anymore. You have to incorporate the changes that we've seen over the last 50 to 60 years. So does that make sense?
Yep, I was just curious.
Yep.
Thank you.
So the next piece is storm surge. This is a little bit more difficult in terms of what the Science and Technical Advisory Panel has in their report. It's unclear as to whether if storm surge itself would be more intense, be a higher frequency. However, with sea level rise on top of that, it's expected that the flood durations may increase over time. So that's to say that the 100-year floodplain might be a lot larger in 50 to 60 years. But the storm surge, that's a lot harder to model. Extreme precipitation, very similar to storm surge. They're not exactly sure how this is going to play out for our region. One of the things that they decided upon, and that's in the report, is that we could see a high of 20% increase by the end of this century as opposed to the 20th century. They weren't confident in any specific extreme precipitation numbers, but in terms of designing, they were comfortable with anything that's going to be designed to 2050 to 2100 to think about a 15% increase in precipitation over time. So that's what they were recommending. And again, this report is not in the final report. It's a separate appendix. It's also online. So if you want to look at all the numbers, all the modeling data, that is all online. And it's on the New Hampshire Coastal Risk and Hazards Commission's
Is
website.
that 15%, is that in a single storm event, or is that for a year?
That's a yearly,
15% more
in a
precipitation
year,
for a year.
in a year. So not necessarily one event over an entire year, that precipitation may be 15% higher. So the report, the way that it's broken down into these 4 different categories: the economy, landscape, natural resources, and heritage. They didn't go, so the commission didn't do any vulnerability assessments. They didn't look at all of these different things individually. Luckily, there were a number of different projects that were going on at the same time, one of which was called the Sea Rise project, and the other one was called the Tides to Storm project. And those were projects that were done at the municipal level to look at vulnerability. So those were incorporated into the final report. So instead of talking about some of the big issues that the report talks about in terms of the region, I'll just focus in on the Sea Rise results for Newmarket and in these terms. So the first one, for the economy, we looked at the number of different parcels that were impacted by different sea level rise scenarios. So if you look at that first one, that 1.7 feet of sea level rise with a storm surge, about 130 parcels, and roughly estimating $40.1 million. Now, before I go any further, that is strictly for planning purposes. And the way that the GIS calculated that was if you had a 500-acre parcel and it had river frontage of 200 feet, it would calculate that entire parcel. There was no way to take how much value just the river frontage of that parcel. So if that parcel was worth $5 million, but the only sea level rise scenarios was just 100 feet, it was calculating that $5 million. So when you see a number that's that large, it's grossly overstated, but there was no other way to get that information. So the other range, if you look at the worst case scenario, the 6.3 feet, about 150 parcels, and again, about $44 million. What I think is probably more beneficial for the community is the one underneath that, the residential structures. So what we did was we looked at aerial photography and we put points down on any houses that we could see. Only 2 structures in that 1.7 feet, about $678,000. And in the worst case scenario, only 6 structures, $1.7 million. So a really big difference when you look at the structures compared to the parcels. The other thing we didn't look at was if those houses did any sort of flood elevation, if they had insurance, if they moved any of their stuff out of their basement. We weren't able to do that analysis. All we saw was that those structures may be impacted by those scenarios. So again, those numbers, that loss damage might be much, much less than those numbers, and should be only used in a very general planning purpose method.
Those 130 parcels up top, those are projected parcels, not parcels that are already been, not existing homes.
Correct.
Okay. And there was no way to break off with the what is it, GPS, GIS, what do you call it?
GIS.
GIS to do that.
You could break where the parcel was impacted, but in terms of assessing a value, you couldn't break how much that parcel was worth that
Oh,
was
you-
being impacted. You had
Okay.
you could only assess what the entire
Okay.
parcel
All right.
was worth. So there's no, besides doing a site-by-site analysis, there's no other way to really get that. And the only reason we did this was to just give the communities a general idea of what your risk is. If you see these numbers for Hampton, Seabrook, the number of structures is a lot higher, and the amount of money is a lot more than some of the inland communities. But so we just wanted to sort of highlight that. In terms of the built landscape, these are things like culverts. So for infrastructure, and for these slides, I only focused in on the worst case scenario. So I focused in on the 6.3 with storm surge. One culvert that was assessed. Let me back up for a second. So the town chose 12 culverts that UNH Stormwater Center did a hydraulic and hydrologic study on. One of those culverts was impacted by the sea level rise scenario, and that's the one on Lumberland Creek over Bay Road. One water access point, one dam. Other critical facilities, there was roughly about 420 feet of municipal sewer, no water pipes. Those areas in and around Water Street, Creighton Street, and Lamprey River at Bay Road, and one pump station. This was with the available GIS data that we had, not to say that there might not be other critical facilities that would be impacted, but things like the town hall, fire department, none of those were impacted by sea level rise scenarios.
Which pump station? Was it,
Mm.
it had to be probably
Probably the
I
Water
think it's-
Street one.
Creighton Street.
Oh, Creighton Street,
Creighton
sorry.
Street?
In terms of transportation assets, no state roads, no non-maintained roads, so class 6 roads, about a quarter-mile of local roads, and the most impacted would be private roads. I think there are a lot of them, the ones off of New Road were the ones that I think were highlighted as being most impacted. Overall, it's less than 3/4 of a mile total. One DOT project, and that was the Bay Road culvert replacement project that happened after the 2006 flood. But in terms of other transportation assets, there wasn't a whole lot of impacts for the town. And again, this is only looking at sea level rise, not necessarily large precipitation events. Those types of riverine flooding is much different than just looking at sea level rise. And that's what this project was looking at, nothing else. In terms of natural resources, we broke it out into land and water. So some of the land resources, there's about 115 acres of conservation land, about 14 different properties, 266 acres of land that was identified in the Wildlife Action Plan, and 245 acres of land that was identified in the Land Conservation Plan. So the Wildlife Action Plan and the Land Conservation Plan, those two overlap a lot of the time. They're basically looking at lands that are sensitive for either wildlife species or other natural habitats. Specifically, they call out Crommett Creek, Lower Lumberland Creek, and Squamscott River. You can see those in the sort of that orange color. Those are areas where that prime environmental areas are. So those are areas that may be impacted. Similar map, but just focused in on water resources. There's 21 acres of a wellhead protection area, and that's the well that's around Moody Point. About 1.5 acres of tidal wetlands, about 15 acres of freshwater wetlands. There's about 32 acres of stratified drift aquifers, and within those areas, there's also almost 100 acres of floodplain. Most of the floodplain was around Lamprey River, Great Bay, and Lumberland Creek. So to give and then again, a very general source, those are some of the water resources that might be impacted. Sure.
You said the Moody Point well
Mhm.
could be, I believe they're getting saltwater intrusion now, right? Yeah.
And then lastly, looked at heritage. I will say right off the bat that the state does not have good historic and cultural GIS data at all. What we had in terms of recreation, we had Shonda Park was something that was impacted. We didn't have any cultural or historic data that would be impacted by sea level rise.
Okay, the whole downtown area and the waterfront is part of the
Is part of a
National
historic district.
Register Historic District, and you might want to highlight that in your future presentations.
Yep. And this doesn't account for a lot of the archaeological sites are underground, and they don't have the GIS information for us to look at that. But I will certainly add in the downtown, because that would be something that would be potentially impacted. So at the very end of the report, it goes into goals, recommendations, and actions. They're based on these 4 overarching themes, the first being science, the second being assessment, the third being implementation, and the third being legislation. Sort of a funny piece of trivia, I guess, is that spells out SAIL, and it's based on New Hampshire's state seal. Also, why we called the Setting Sail project is based on this. So if you ever get asked about that in 20 years, that's where it comes from. There are a number of different recommendations and actions that are in the report. You can sift through them. Some of them are geared towards legislative action, some are for state agencies, and some are for municipalities. So each one of the goals is labeled, and it says in italics which one that one's geared towards. For what I did, I just pulled out some examples to give you an idea of what a municipality might be looking at. And I'll go through these pretty quickly, but securing funding to conduct more vulnerability assessments at appropriate scales. And that would be something like looking at that pump station on Creighton Street. All we did was say that it might be impacted. We have no idea what the impacts would be, what the town could do. You're going to need more site-specific data to make long-term decisions about that. I wouldn't make a decision necessarily straight on the sea rise. Just we've identified some areas where the town might want to think about investigating it more. Make existing structures and facilities more resilient, acquiring properties in high-risk areas, incorporating coastal hazards, vulnerability in policies, plans, and investments, so things like long-term planning, capital improvements, master plan, any sort of policies, thinking about incorporating some of these vulnerabilities. A really good opportunity would be that the town's hazard mitigation plan, it needs to be updated and will expire next March or April, I think, in 2018. So I know that we're going to be updating that soon, but incorporating some of this information into your hazard mitigation plan is also another option, which we're seeing more and more communities do. Incorporating best available science into economic development plans, and improve information available to property owners and prospective buyers. So again, this was just, there's over 100 different actions that are in the report. If you want to know more information, I suggest you take a look through it. If you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to me. If there are questions that I can't answer, I can certainly forward those on to the necessary folks either at DES or someone else. If you have specific questions on the modeling work, I know I can ask the folks over at UNH if they'd be willing to either come in and give you more information. That's totally up to you. We just wanted to make sure that you were aware that the report exists, where to find it, how to use it, and some of the vulnerabilities that we found in the Sea Rise project. I think that's it.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Kyle?
Do you want me to give a quick update on the stormwater?
Sure, if you'd like to.
Just a really quick update about the stormwater regulation update that we've been working on. I have met with the subcommittee 3 times. Over the last couple of months. We're about halfway through the SWA model ordinance. I suspect that we'll probably be done in 2 more meetings. We'll have gone through the entire thing. So we're hoping that by sometime either right after the holidays, but definitely sometime in January, we'll be bringing those revisions back to this group for comment, and then hopefully be ready sometime in February for a public hearing to adopt those changes.
Great. Anybody have any questions? Anybody in the audience have any questions for Kyle? Thank you very much, Kyle.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Thank
the
you.
work. Alrighty, so, moving on. Next is P&F Realty. Lot merger for properties at 3 Bayview Drive, also known as 9 Lookout Place, tax map R1 Lot 9, and 3 Lookout Place, tax map R1 Lot 10, both in the R1 zone. Diane, do you want to just explain this to the board?
Yeah, these are actually two substandard size lots that were combined back in 2008, and primarily because the lots were such in size that the lots individually could not support a septic system, so the owner had to combine the lots in order to get approval from the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services for the septic system. And it's something that we picked up just in reviewing our tax maps recently. We did an update to the tax maps, and we found that this merger had taken place, but it did not follow the proper protocol, if you will, which means that it has to come before the planning board for the planning board to authorize the chairman to sign the merger on behalf of the town, and then it gets recorded. So we're doing this as sort of a housekeeping measure after the fact, and I would recommend that the planning board authorize the chairman to move forward with this so that we can clean this up in the record, and so there won't be any further questions if it ever came up in a title examination or anything like that.
Is there anybody from P&F here?
No, I don't
Nobody's
believe.
here, okay.
Can I just comment on this, because I sold all these properties?
Oh, you did? Okay.
So the original subdivision approval back in 1963 required that if a residential building was going to be constructed on any of the properties, that the two lots would have to be combined. That was on the.
Oh, it wasn't, okay.
So that's in that subdivision approval. And then prior to selling the properties, we went and got the state-approved septic systems designed for each of the combined. So there'll be a total of 5 of these.
Oh, really?
So
Okay.
is this the one that's existing,
This is
that
the
has
one
a
that's-
CO issued on it?
Recently, I believe.
Well, there's
was-
2 other houses that building permits have been issued, and there's 2 more to come.
Okay,
but-
I think this is one that they were ready for a C of O, if I'm not
Do we do
mistaken.
The merger should be,
Show you
the
on the
merger should be,
tax map.
should be happening, though, under that subdivision approval from prior, before the COs are issued. So we might want to bring that
You
to
don't have-
Mike's attention.
This is a merger, it doesn't have to.
No, I understand, but the condition of the approval was that the lots had to be merged prior to building on the a residential property
Okay.
on the lot.
Well, I don't
So
think
just to
Mike-
bring that to Mike's
I
attention.
don't
Yeah.
think Mike was aware of
Okay.
it, so. But anyway, it's,
So I'll I'll definitely make a motion to approve the lot merger for properties at 3 Bayview Drive, on tax map R1 Lot 9, and 3 Lookout Place at tax map R1 Lot 10 in the R1 zone.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it, it passes unanimously. Next is Kathy and Eric Harder, request for waiver of impact fees for an accessory apartment located at 5 Sanborn Ave, tax map U2, lot 351 in the R2 zone. Is there anybody here? Please, would you please come up? Just in case we have any questions, I'm gonna ask Diane to walk us through. You received a letter on this, is that?
yeah, we did receive a request. This is an application that came before the zoning board. I want to say it was June of this year.
It's been a long time. Yes, but we're
Okay,
getting this
and-
close.
And it was approved unanimously by the zoning board of adjustment for a special exception. And the applicant is here today requesting a waiver from the impact fees on the basis that the size of the units is such that it would not lend itself to children. It's, let's see, we're talking a
One,
one-bedroom
Yeah.
unit as opposed to the 2, which would be permitted under the current zoning. So generally, there'll be a small number of people living there, 1 or 2 people. The applicant also points out that they're paying the connection fee for water and sewer, which is a requirement of the Water and Sewer Department. And so they're requesting a waiver from school impact fees and the recreation impact fees and water and sewer. And just to give you an idea of what that amounts to under our current schedule, that's roughly $47.65. So $4,765 for an impact fee for just one unit. So the applicant is requesting that a waiver be granted, and that the extra income will help them in making the investments that they're planning on doing to the property and to enhance property values in the neighborhood. And by waiving the fees, that would be advantageous to them, removing a cost burden for their family, so.
Very much. The water and sewer is $2,000. Like, wow, yikes.
Does anybody have any questions? Val, you were first?
No, I think Rosie was.
Okay.
I remember when we got the new RSA back in, as of June 1st, 2017, we had the 750 square feet, and everybody, the board decided to change amend the ordinance that we had at the time and change it to 1,000 square feet. And it also stated in our old ordinance that the purpose of an accessory apartment and what the intent is and all that. And we had to eliminate a sentence because it said, to balance this, the number of bedrooms in accessory apartments is severely limited to prevent excessive growth in the number of school-age children. And I remember the board at the time had extensive discussion regarding that, stating with the new RSA that we cannot tell them how many bedrooms to put in there. They can have up to 2 bedrooms. That we cannot do that. That would be
We can't discriminate against.
we can't
who lives in-
discriminate.
who lives in-
Right.
Right.
What's the status of the update to to our ordinance?
We already
It's
it's
gone
gone to the
through
town
the-
council and
And
it's
the
been passed.
council has passed it, so
It's been enacted.
so we need to make a decision on this under the current ordinance.
That's correct.
And there's specific language in there, correct, about the ability to waive the impact fees.
There's not
That there is no
specific
language, there's no
about waiving.
specific language in there, but what's the square
We had
footage of the
had-
unit?
It's
Yeah.
650?
I'm sorry?
650?
650.
650.
We had discussions about actually changing the impact
Right.
fee legislation that we have on the books in the zoning ordinance, and it was decided by the board that the
Case
board
by
wanted
case.
to review each one on a case-by-case and not have a uniform law that exempted them, if you will, from impact fee legislation. And that's how it was left. One thing that was clear about the RSA that was passed is that any zoning restrictions that apply to single-family homes should also apply to accessory apartments. And that means lots, well, to the extent that lot size and density comes into play, that there wouldn't be, you wouldn't discern between an accessory apartment. So, I think that would follow that, impact fees then should be applied as well. But that's a policy decision for this board to make, and I think in the past we have waived them for accessory apartments. It's been pretty clear. But that's something for the board to discuss,
This is the first one under the new,
under the new regulations that we have on the
Oh,
books.
boy.
But by us,
Case.
by this planning board stating that they don't have to pay the school, say just for instance, the school portion, because they said that they are not going to have school-age children there. There is no way we can enforce that, and I don't think the planning board has the ability to adjudicate that as well, because we're basically saying, in approving this, that, okay, you're not gonna have kids there, and we don't have that legal ability to do that, especially under the new RSA. Irregardless of the size of the unit, we are not able to say that they can or cannot have children. So if
Correct.
we
We can't say whether they
if we
can or
can't say
Can't
that,
say that.
then we cannot approve a waiver because we have to state we're approving the waiver because they're not gonna have kids there. We can't do that.
Well, I don't think any
It's
of
a
the,
conflict.
I'm not sure that's what she said.
I don't think any of the waivers that we've ever approved,
Was whether or not they were
Was
gonna have
whether they're not
kids.
gonna-
It was based
yes.
upon the preponderance of the evidence of whether
Right.
or not the
Right.
potential of the impact on the school.
and in this case, I don't believe that, I'm sorry, are you Kathy?
Yes.
I don't believe that Kathy has, in her letter, I don't think the letter says there's not gonna be children there. They say that it's 650 square feet, one bedroom,
Right.
which makes it more, makes it less likely that there will be children there. I understand your point, Roseanne, I know what
We
you're
don't
saying.
have the authority.
But they're not, nobody has said that there's not gonna be children there. I just,
Well, we definitely have the authority to waive impact fees.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's clear within our,
But I don't,
go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, just make sure I'm doing this the right way. Kathy, does your husband work at Liberty?
He does,
Okay,
yes.
I need to excuse myself then.
Okay.
Oh,
I just want to make sure I was doing the right thing.
Yes,
so-
you're doing the right thing, Jane.
Yes,
Thank you.
Eric. Yeah.
Sorry.
Amy, you were gonna say something?
Well, I mean, if the point is to review this on a case-by-case basis, and in this case, it's 650 square feet, it's a one-bedroom apartment, the use of that is, there's not gonna be a lot of people in there.
It's a small bedroom, too.
You know, so, I mean, I don't think we can, you know, this is the case, you know?
well, because the evidence that you would really be
Right.
looking for is of the apartments that are in Newmarket that are 600 square feet or less, how many of those apartments have children, school-age children on them? That, if you were really looking for the evidence to support one way or another, you know, what is that percentage? You know, what's the likelihood that a 650 square foot apartment will have a school-age children in them?
Right.
And
Do
if
we
it-
know that?
I know I don't.
I don't know that.
We have a decline in school enrollment.
Yeah, what?
Decline in
School
school
enrollment.
enrollment.
Right.
So,
Over the years, it has been
Right.
fewer and fewer children to
True.
educate in the school
Exactly.
system. That
And-
has
and-
changed.
And the idea
the
is
last 20
to
years.
Mm-hmm.
take every one of these requests and look at it on a case by
Right.
case. Otherwise, it's really easy to just say
Right.
no.
Right.
Or yes to everybody or no to everybody, but
Yeah.
you look at it on a case by case basis. Rosie?
Right,
go
totally
ahead.
agree.
and they're looking for a waiver for the water and sewer
The impact.
No.
impact fee, but they're still paying for the hookup.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yes.
They've paid for the.
And they're already tied
They're
into the
two-
water
they're
and
two
sewer.
Yeah, they're two, I went and talked with, who is the?
Sean Gregg?
Sean Gregg.
Yeah, Sean and I had a long conversation about the two different fees, and, because I thought the 2,000 was kind of a lot for whether it's a four-bedroom house or a
It's the
one-bedroom
same.
apartment. But as he explained to me, it was kind of like, the town kind of needs to recoup some money to pay for all the water things, and right now they haven't like divided that to so much, say, per bedroom or per toilet or however.
Yeah.
Maybe 10 years down the road or something like that, he was saying, I don't know. He said he would be happy to waive the fees on this, but he couldn't waive the
Hookup.
the tie-in fees, even though we didn't, I mean, it's all in our sewer, so. So I said, okay, thank you. We had a good conversation about it.
Right,
So
the
it's
water and
like-
sewer fees are generally for completely new hookups. This is a house that's already tied into the water and sewer.
Yeah, so they're just
I
trying
certainly
to-
can understand that.
Yeah. Add-
What's everybody think? Val, what's your thoughts?
I don't think this 650 square foot apartment's going to have an impact on the schools, is my personal opinion. I think that you're going to tend to have, and this is right downtown, right, Sanborn?
Yes, yeah.
So you're likely going to have a single professional in there, maybe an older person, perhaps a couple.
And we already do have a tenant lined up, so.
So I
one
think the
single
likelihood
woman.
is minimal. I'm comfortable with waiving them. I guess could go either way on the recreational fee. I mean, you will have someone who's residing there that will have use of the recreational facilities in town, and would hopefully partake in them. And I would certainly waive the water and sewer.
Diane, can I ask you a question, real quick? I think you mentioned it when you were giving the review of this, that historically, usually,
We have waived.
we
them.
have waived the fees?
For accessory
for
apartments.
accessory apartments. Okay.
Since I've been here, and it's
Okay.
been 11 years.
Yeah, that's why I thought, I just wanted to make sure.
But that's absolutely true, but I think the worst decision we could make would be to say we've always done.
Oh, yeah,
accessory
I
apartment.
agree,
That's
I
why
just-
I agree, we look at everything
Well, and
independent,
that's why we
case by
didn't,
case
that's why we
basis.
left it in.
Yeah, that's why we left it in.
Correct,
Right.
absolutely, absolutely. Rosie, what are your thoughts?
Well, I remember the distinct discussion when we changed the ordinance back then, and we did discuss the fact that because of the way the RSA is written, that we would not be able to waive any impact fees because of the way the RSA is written. And just because it's 650, it doesn't prohibit anyone, and we can't get a promise from her, we can't ask her not to, so the basis of the information that we have to waive the impact fee is not based on anything that we can legally do to tell her she can't have children there, or it's too small. You've had several people living in small areas. We have a $30-odd million school coming online. We have a $14 million bill for sewer and water users. And under the circumstances, and I feel under the legality of the way the new RSA is written, that we should not grant any waivers at all to anyone at all. The town, we just finished the CIP report. There's a lot of bills to pay. And I just don't think that we can legally say, okay, you're not having kids, and that's what we're basing the waiver on. We can't base a waiver on her not having children there. We can't do it legally. We're saying, okay, we'll give you the waiver, but you can't have kids there, because that's what we're basing the decision to give her the waiver for. And we can't do that.
Well, the discussion is about the preponderance of the evidence.
Right.
It's like if somebody comes in and does a 100-unit housing development, and we make them do a traffic study. We don't say, you can build this as long as the traffic never exceeds what you said you had in the study. It's reasonable, it's based on the evidence you have at the time. The evidence here is what Kathy wants us to consider, is that this is a 650 square foot unit. 650 square foot units generally don't have children in them. That's what she's asking us to consider. It's not based on the fact that there won't be children in there. There could be children living in there at some point. We're making a decision based on what each of us thinks is the likelihood that there will be children there that would trigger that. And that's what we're asked to do. There's no guarantees. There's
Or
no
the impact
guarantees.
on the school is going to create a larger,
Correct.
which is going to create the potential for increased capital improvements to the school.
Correct.
We can go right back to, the whole issue of our impact fees are just so out of date, and I keep bringing this up, are they really even legal? Because when were they last updated?
2001.
Right,
And it's supposed to be every 10 years.
every
huh?
10 years.
No, I agree. So Rosie, I understand I absolutely understand your position. I just want to be clear that we're not making a decision based on any guarantees or promises. Any of the decisions we make are not
But
based
that's the
on
only
any of
way I
that.
think we can, as a planning board, I think that's the only way we can render our decisions as to what we can legally ask the applicant to do or not to do. We cannot ask them not to have children in there. And if we
Right.
can't legally get a promise, legally or otherwise, that they will not have children in there, we can't legally give them a waiver for the school portion.
What are you basing that on, the actual RSA language?
The way we had to change the RSA and the discussion we had when we changed it. And I think we're all in agreement, basically, that because of the language of the RSA and the way we had to legally take out that line in our old zoning ordinance, that we will be limited to one bedroom for the, not to have extra children in the school department. We couldn't legally do that. It was illegal.
Well,
It was discriminatory.
It was
I don't have an issue with taking the language out. I'd like to know where in the current RSA or in our ordinance you feel that we don't have the right to waive impact fees.
It's not written in our ordinance.
Well, our ordinance allows us to waive impact fees. That's how our ordinance is written. We have the ability to waive impact
The
fees.
planning board is the only board.
Correct, which is why they're
the only board
here.
That can do that.
So I'm more concerned with, is there something in the RSA that is conflicting with our current ordinance, that you're saying that we can't waive impact fees?
We're waiving impact fees on the fact that she will not have children there. We cannot legally ask her not to have children there, so therefore there's no promise to the board
Yeah,
that there
I'm-
won't be any children there, so I don't see how we can say we can impact with the evidence in front of us. You can put you can put kids in a 650 square feet. People have done it before. So I don't see how we can tell her, we can't legally tell her she can't have kids.
Well, I think it's no different than and I know we're not supposed to be, talking about precedent that was preset, but we never required anyone to put a deed restriction on the rental or the occupancy of that unit that there wouldn't be kids. It was really a matter of making a common sense decision amongst board members of whether or not we felt that particular accessory unit or apartment would create an impact on the school or recreation or water and sewer.
And I
Not whether or not there's any guarantee of who's gonna be in there
I
or
remember
who's not.
several applicants stating in regards to their testimony to asking for the waiver was for the impact fees. They made public statements that they would not have any children there. So, I mean, it's,
Well,
Right,
yeah, it's not enforceable. I mean.
I know it's not
yeah, They could walk up the
enforceable,
door. I mean, it's not, because we've
Yeah.
never said that you had to put a deed restriction on a
I think
property.
we can ask somebody to do that.
no,
no, you couldn't.
can't.
But I can
Janice,
see
what
it.
do you think?
Oh, real. After Roseanne? I just think, well, I would be comfortable if we charged a rec department impact fee and a school impact fee, and I would waive the other fees.
Amy?
I'm okay with waiving the fees. What was the rec department one exactly?
The dollar amount?
Well, and I don't know
Was
that
it
we went
4
into that one,
different
did we?
types?
Or did I
Well, there-
just
she-
blanket?
The total was provided
Yeah.
by Diane.
I can tell you what the breakout is, if that would be helpful. The recreation fee is only $353. It's really the public school fee that's the highest, which is almost $3,000,
Kathy,
$2,963.
what was the rec department, what was your reason for applying for that one? I guess, the rec department waiver?
Oh,
Impact fee?
just
You
from
addressed that?
from the general fees that it's gonna be like one person
Oh, okay.
there. I mean, that's fine. I just want to finish this project. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to. Yeah.
Long haul.
Cal, what do you think?
Well, I would be for waiving the fees, not waiving the recreational fee.
Not waiving the recreational? Okay,
The rest is.
okay.
And just one
ahead,
more
Ruth.
thing too, with this change with the RSA, it now states that we must allow an accessory apartment to any single-family unit in town, which we didn't do that before.
Correct.
So now you're gonna have a preponderance of accessory units popping up everywhere. So if we start waiving fees like this, especially at this time in our town's budget with the school and the water and all those bills coming in, I just don't think it's good planning, period.
Okay. So what's the pleasure of the board?
I'll make a motion to request for a waiver of impact fees for the school and the water and sewer for an accessory apartment located at 5 Sanborn Ave, tax map U2, lot 351 in the R2 zone.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of granting the waiver of the fees for school and water and sewer? Say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay.
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 4-2, the motion passes. Thank you. Good luck.
Thanks, I'll need it.
All right, now on to new and old business. I don't have any old business. Anybody have any old business? Any new business? Diane?
I do have old business. There was a question that came up from the board at the last meeting about the appointment to the Energy and Environment Advisory Committee. And I sent out a copy of the resolution establishing the committee to the board members. And at this point, is there anyone interested who would like to serve in the capacity as the planning board liaison to that committee?
I can put the new guy on that.
Get his feet wet, will ya?
Good place to start, don't you think?
Well, yeah, if nobody's gonna volunteer, I think we just.
What will it comprise of, Diane?
Well, this is what it says in the resolution. The town council creates an energy and environment advisory committee to recommend best management practices in the areas of municipal buildings, facilities, operations, fuels, vehicles, transportation, purchasing, energy sources, air quality, and climate change. The committee shall include policies that the town already has, identify and recommend voluntary actions, programs, and projects to the citizens of Newmarket, and recommend projects for funding. And there's 7 members, a member from the town council, a member from the Conservation Commission, 1 from the planning board, and 4 members at large.
Oh, maybe there'll
I'll
only
do
be
it.
6 members.
I'll do
Rosie,
it.
you gonna volunteer?
Yeah.
Great.
Oh,
I think that'll help a lot with the CIP.
Well, that's a
That's
good point.
true.
Yeah.
Because it's really more
Yeah, because it's
falling
all
into
stuff that we're looking into now, and especially with Greg, the new facilities director, it's,
I think you'll be doing a lot.
oh,
with Craig.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, so I'll do it.
Okay,
Just
great.
let me know when it's gonna start.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
We'll pass
Rosie.
your name on.
I was about ready to volunteer.
Powers that be.
Anybody have any else new or old business? You wanted to talk about,
Just, I wanted to mention that we do have an agenda item coming in November. Property at 80 Exeter Road, do I have the correct?
81.
81. Property that's owned by Eric DeWitt. Eric's here this evening and wanted to come and observe a planning board meeting before he came forward with his proposal. Eric owns the property directly across from the car wash?
From the Irving gas station.
From the Irving gas station next to the funeral home. It's the property that has the little cabins.
Weiner
Oh, the
property?
little house.
Yes.
Okay, the
Yes.
little houses, and
Yes.
it has a fairly extensive wetland area, and it's a major drainage area. And Eric and I have been talking for, about 3 or 4 years now about different proposals. And he has been trying to market the property extensively. And we've talked about the possibility of maybe him getting a variance or possibly a zoning change. And Eric, do you want to tell them a little bit about your project, or do you want me to describe it?
Yeah, I mean, just in general terms, like Diane said, my name's Eric DeWitt. I grew up in Newmarket, graduated, and since then I've worked in the Boston area as a designer. I've owned the property for almost 10 years, and I've wanted to do something with it for a while. I've sort of come to an opportune time in my career, and my ideas on what to do have solidified. So I'm submitting an application for a conceptual review for next meeting. And at that time, I'll have drawings and a presentation. I wasn't really prepared tonight. I just came to observe.
yeah, we don't want to get into any
Yeah,
level
we
of
can't
detail
anyway.
certainly ahead of
I
time
just,
either.
I
so-
wanted to
What is the
introduce the
project?
project and
Yeah.
introduce Eric to you.
So, yeah, I mean, it's removing the current structures and replacing it with a single structure, sort of a green development on a difficult property, as Diane mentioned.
Okay.
Is it a residence or a business or
Mixed use.
Mixed use.
mixed use?
Yes.
Okay,
We will look forward to seeing you at the next meeting.
in
Great.
November.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Eric.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Oh, my
I know it's hard
It's
to
Yeah,
believe.
you
Flies.
want turkey sandwiches for the next meeting.
With cranberry.
Yeah.
Bye now.
I want to
So, are there any committee reports? Any committee reports, CIP, Rosie?
No, CIP's
CIP's done.
And Diane did a wonderful presentation to the town council regarding the roles of CIP and what it means and what it does. And we're gonna have a meeting on a Saturday?
Either a Saturday workshop with the town council.
In
or
the
may
budget,
even be-
in the budget committee?
I'm not sure, it's a
Okay.
joint meeting, that hasn't really been established, but
Okay.
we wanted to make sure that the CIP committee had an opportunity to present their recommendations and have a discussion with the town council as to the justification for their recommendations.
And again, I like to publicly thank Diane for all the work she puts into it. We would not be able to do it without her help. And Greg was tremendously helpful
Yeah,
as
he
well.
was.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rosie. And Roseanne did a great job this year in chairing the meeting, and keeping us on track.
They call me,
Well,
on the
we
garden
were
club,
able
they
to
call me
get
the
it
staff
done.
sergeant.
I think you have a different name.
Well, Val's father gave me a name, Sparkplug. Which, and I sign all my emails now, Sparkplug. Or Sparky. Very apropos.
Anybody else? Any news from the town council?
Well, we had the presentation. That was the big item of the night. Our budget review's set for October 28th. So,
Steve had mentioned something about maybe having a meeting before the regular town council meeting on the 1st of November.
1st November.
1st of November, and I don't know if that was discussed with the council or what the status is. I personally have a conflict with that Saturday.
I
My
don't-
husband's going in for major
I don't
surgery the
recall
day before.
discussing, that's what I was gonna ask, because I don't recall discussing another Saturday meeting, so.
All right, I guess
was
I'll
gonna
have to
ask
talk
you
to
if-
Steve,
Yeah,
because I'm not going to be able to make the meeting on the 28th, because my husband's going in for surgery on the 27th.
Back so soon?
He came back for more.
Susan told me to slip these in your Dropbox, but
Oh.
they are too big for it, so.
Oh, okay. I will take them to her. Thank you.
and then Diane, I'm traveling again for our next meeting in November, but I'll see if Gretchen
Okay, that'd be
will be
great.
here.
That'd be great.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else have anything they would like to bring up?
No. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Have a good month, everybody.